would like to begin this evening's event with a land acknowledgement. Brandon University has campuses on Treaty 1 and Treaty 2 lands, and we're a gathering place for people from many backgrounds and around the world. In this way, we carry on the Indigenous customs of our home in Brandon. We acknowledge Brandon is on shared territory between the Dakota Oyote, the Anishinaabe, and the national homeland of the Red River Métis. Today, many other Indigenous peoples call Brandon their home. The plants, animals, and people who share their history and traditions on the land and water of this area deeply influence our gathering today. Thank you all for sharing the space with us today. So here's the format. We're going to start with each candidate having a minute to introduce themselves. The order of the opening comments has been selected, I understand. Following that, our panel will begin asking their questions. Each candidate who's directly asked a question will have 1 minute to answer. The other candidate simply raise his hand to chime in, and I expect that this will happen quite a bit tonight. Note that our panelists and I reserve the right to ask our own follow-ups if we think a question hasn't been answered fully, or if we're simply seeking more information. Please note, we ask that the candidates and all members of our audience be respectful in our interactions this evening. The organizers reserve the right to ask anyone who's being disruptive to leave the premises, so I thank you for your cooperation in advance. So we're going to meet the panelists. Now, you're going to recognize these folks and you're going to be excited about it. Devin Ross, political columnist for both the Brandon Sun and the Winnipeg Free Press. You're a well-known communication consultant. From Brandon University, Dr. Kelly Saunders, professor and chair of the political science department. And Chris Hunt is our rookie, but we're very excited about his prospects. And Chris is a political science instructor at Brandon University. Our candidates tonight are from the New Democratic Party, Quentin Robinson, and from the Conservative Party of Canada, Grant Jackson. The Liberal Party candidate, Mr. Ali Tourir, advised that he would not be able to attend this evening due to, I understand, family concerns. Therefore, it will be a tighter event and hopefully a little bit more heated. So let us begin. Now, who's going first? Mr. Jackson.
Thank you very much, Kerry. I just want to thank, first of all, you, Kelly, Devin, Chris, the Brandon Sun, WCG, and Brandon University for putting this event on. A very important part of the democratic process to have a local debate amongst the candidates. Great to see Quentin again, and I have not met Mr. Tourir. I'm sorry that there's a family illness that's preventing him from attending tonight, so we're certainly wishing him and his family all the best in dealing with those health concerns. After the last 10 years, grocery prices, housing prices are out of control. We have the slowest growing GDP in the G7. Crime and addictions are rampant in our streets. Our immigration system, which was once held as a standard for the world, is broken. Our military needs our support, and we are under threat of economic attack from our closest partner and ally. We need to rapidly build more homes, stop the crime, reduce costs, rebuild our military, and bring home affordability for seniors, families, and all Canadians. And our Conservative team has a common sense plan to do just that. It is time for change in this country, and I am proud to be your Conservative candidate for Brandon-Souris with a common sense plan to do just that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Quentin?
Thank you. Thanks to folks from Brandon University and the Sun and WCGtv for making this event possible, to draw a crowd here tonight to be involved in the democratic process. Really important to have an opportunity to hear the views of candidates in an important time like this. And it'd be good to see Grant again. And my thoughts with Mr. Ali Tourir as well in the time of this family situation. As for me, we'll have lots of time to talk about policy. I just wanted to let people know a little bit more about who I am, those who maybe haven't had a chance to know that a bit. Because knowing who I am is significant to you making a choice about who will represent you. Who is this person that will speak on my behalf? So just start out with the fact that I grew up on a farm and became a farmer, operated a farm business with my partner, Madeline, and then became a United Church minister and a family counselor. And so whether you work in a suit and tie or whether you work in insulated coveralls, I've been there. I can represent you. Other than 9 years living here in Brandon, great years, the rest of my life has been in small rural communities. So city or country, I know what that's like. I can represent you. In my vocation and in my volunteer activity, I've offered community leadership in a variety of organizations. My history of community leadership will help me to represent you. I feel privileged to be an active member of a faith community that stands against discrimination and for inclusion of people from marginalized communities, and this will help me to represent you. The policies of the NDP fit so well with the values that I have from my life experience that I'm proud to present them tonight and explore them with you here.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Is it appropriate that I call you by your first names? Is that okay?
Sure. Please.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So we're going to start off. Kelly, I understand that you have a question.
Yes, I have the first question. Is my microphone working? Oh, here we go. Okay, awesome. So my question is for Mr. Jackson. Mr. Jackson, the Conservative Party platform says that the English language division of the CBC would be defunded if the Conservatives form government. Please explain how Canadians would benefit from such a decision and how communities across Canada would be impacted.
Thank you, Kelly, for that question. I know this has been a topic of a lot of conversation. Yes, our Conservative Party has committed to defunding the English language portion of the CBC as a federally funded organization. That would not impact CBC Radio Canada services, just to be clear. That would continue as is. We believe that it is time to get away from having a federally funded broadcaster. We believe that this would bring fairness amongst all of the national news organizations. Now, CBC would still be Canadian owned, and it would be a non-profit as proposed in our policy platform. So it would still be accessible to sponsorships, advertising, all the types of dollars that other businesses, except in this would be a non-profit organizational structure to make sure that the CBC continues to exist. But that it wouldn't be subject to federal subsidy and federal grant money. And in addition, we want to make sure that there's a level playing field for all. And I know that there's a lot of concern that I'm hearing about out there when the CBC continues to deliver their services and ask for more federal subsidy. Meanwhile, their executives are still getting paid significant bonuses for delivering less and less service. So we want to make sure that the taxpayers aren't delivering large bonuses to the CBC executives. We want to make sure it's a nonprofit model to ensure that the programs continues to exist, but that federal tax dollars aren't going into it.
Thank you very much. Quinn, I'm sure you want to weigh in on this one.
Certainly, yeah. I'm a lifelong CBC fan, and it's hard for me to imagine a Canada without a CBC in the form that it is now, because cutting federal funding means that, like, you cut funding to anything and services are going to be reduced. CBC is the voice in communities, the only radio voice and sometimes television voice that has penetrated the far reaches of our country, our frontier areas, and helps people in those places feel Canadian as a result of having that service reach them. I think in an age of much misinformation and disinformation, CBC has a potential to be talk about it as being government funded or publicly funded. And I strongly prefer publicly funded because it's easy to make it sound like a voice of the government, which it is not. It is a voice of the people. And I know there are...
Just a second, I'm sorry to interrupt. If you could hold off your applause till the very end, that way we can get more questions and answers. Quentin?
Yeah, I hear voices on the CBC that I don't hear listening to other news sources as a result. If there's an imperative to turn profits in order to stay on the air, then it's easy to become an infotainment station rather than a news station. And for me, that's really critical in the age that we're in now, where we need the most solid information that we can get.
Kelly, do you want to follow up on that?
Yeah, I just want to pursue, not only are we seeing the rise of misinformation and disinformation that is really weakening and challenging our democracy, but now more than ever, we see threats coming from the United States about turning Canada into the 51st state. Canadians are rallying around identity and those institutions that are truly Canadian. And I think CBC is probably one of those institutions that many Canadians point to. Again, just as a follow-up to you, Grant, is this really the right time to be defunding a national, vibrant, culturally responsible institution such as a CBC, given what's happening with the United States?
Well, my response to that would be is that I think there are folks that certainly identify with the CBC as an organization that is part of the fabric of Canada over the last number of decades that it's existed. I don't expect the CBC to disappear. I expect it to function as a nonprofit, as many organizations in the country do. And every organization would still be subject to the Canadian Broadcasting Standards Council's regulations in terms of the topic of information, disinformation, misinformation. We have those standards that should apply to all news organizations across the board. The CBC would be no different, whether it is publicly funded or whether it is a nonprofit. So that would be my comment to that. I don't personally watch mainstream media. Most people, I think, from a younger generation, in fact, are probably guilty of not subscribing to cable at all. So I think these platforms are changing as to how the Canadian public is consuming information, and the media landscape in the country needs to adapt as well. And I think we, as the government, shouldn't be publicly funding one specific type of media over another. And so that's why our Conservative platform proposes to shift it from publicly funded to being a nonprofit organization, while keeping the radio services, which I do recognize reach many areas of Canada that no other news service, no internet, in terms of other options of news source reach. We want to make sure that that service is still available, but modernize the system and the news landscape in this country.
Okay, before we, I'm going to ask you to hold on to the applause. I have a question, an area of concern before we go over to Devon, and that I have a tremendous concern that if it becomes a nonprofit, that an individual, I don't know, let's say you owned an EV battery and car company and you had a tremendous amount of wealth, could essentially control that through your own funding. Assuage me of my concerns. Tell me why that shouldn't be a concern.
Well, again, I think it comes back to the Canadian Broadcasting Standards Council. If you feel that an organization is biased in a sense, there are regulations around that. I mean, CTV, City, Global are all privately owned, and these organizations still have to adhere to the same standards that the CBC would, whether it's accepting contributions or sponsorship dollars from a certain company or not. I believe that our media landscape here in Canada is very different, even though we have some that are privately owned, some that are publicly owned, compared to the American comparison that I know folks are concerned about. I'm not a proponent of bringing the American-style system here, but that can be done through government regulation. It doesn't need to be done through public funding.
Now, Devon, you want to weigh in?
Just 2 quick points. First of all, the the CBC in a number of rural communities and remote communities is the only radio station that people have access to. It plays an important role in emergencies, in particularly tornadoes, weather, flooding. In the absence of the CBC, where would those people get their information? That's the first question. Second thing is, you know, we've had radio stations and television stations change ownership here in Brandon. Stations that used to have reporters that filed news and covered community events, they don't do that now. We get canned things from other cities that are broadcast here in Brandon. Is that what would happen in the event that the CBC was defunded?
So on the first question, in terms of emergency response, we have to make sure that communities are well protected against natural disasters. There's no question about that. So there have to be emergency response systems. We know we need to boost cell phone coverage as well as high quality fiber internet access across the country. We're all starting to get emergency alerts on our cell phones. That needs to be expanded into rural and remote communities to make sure that those folks have appropriate responses to a natural disaster, tornado, whatever it may be. On your second question, in terms of local journalism, that is certainly not our goal or intent with this. And in fact, in our platform, we commit to expanding the local journalism initiative by an additional $25 million. There are a number of reporters in Manitoba whose jobs are funded through the local journalism initiative. I believe at the Brandon Sun, certainly Maggie McIntosh at the Winnipeg Free Press and others are funded through this program. Our Conservative platform commits to adding money to this program, to making sure that local reporters covering local issues for local papers are supported and in fact enhanced and expanded. I love our local papers. It was very sad for the community of Souris when the Souris Plain Dealer closed its doors as part of the Corner Pocket Publishing Group years ago. The Boissevain Recorder and others are doing their best to cover many rural towns now, but I fully believe in supporting local, good, rural journalism, and that's why we've committed to expanding the local journalism initiative by $25 million.
Quentin, you must have some thoughts on this.
Yeah, just come back to the CBC being the voice of Canadians. I know that within the CBC, there's a mandate to reflect the voices of communities that have been marginalized in our society. And I hear those voices much more than I do on commercial stations. And I think it's important that we have the voices of Indigenous people, the voices of newcomers to our country, the voices of 2S LGBTQ plus community reflected. And CBC is such a strong source for those diverse voices that I wonder, no matter what other kinds of supports might come in from other places, that we would hear those voices in the same way that we do through CBC.
So, okay, let me follow up. I've got a question for you along those lines. One of the great things my dad gave me was an ability to argue both sides of any question. It doesn't make me popular, but so here's the question that I have for you. I've already asked one. Here's the question for you. Why can't we regulate? We don't need to own funeral homes, but the private sector steps in and takes care of that. That's as central to life as it gets. Why does the government need to own this then? Can we not regulate it?
As if regulation of government in market and businesses is greatly welcomed.
Based on with me, sir, but I can answer that.
So
I believe fervently in obeying the rules at all times, but
right, right. It's but when there are commercial pressures, then the commercial pressures become the profit orientation is one that always stands in sort of in tension with public service. Yeah.
okay.
And so it complicates, I think, the ability of a broadcaster to publish freely without concern about how this will affect the sort of advertisers and things like that.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Have we exhausted the question? We want to keep going. Okay, let's go next.
Next question, and this is for Quentin.
Okay.
Over the past 3 months, Donald Trump has threatened to use economic force to crush our economy and make Canada America's 51st state. He has also imposed tariffs that have cost thousands of Canadians their jobs and threatened to raise those tariffs today. How should we respond to these threats and actions?
We should, there are different levels of response, and one is to be clear that we're not about to stand for being bullied. And I think that countervailing duties that are well chosen in response are part of our appropriate response to that. I also think, though, that that will be in and of itself insufficient, because we know that we have 3.5 years in all likelihood, at least, to wait through. And I don't think we can really wait that long, because after that 3.5 years, then what? We don't know then what. I think it's time for us as a country to reconsider our trading relationships around the world altogether, and also reconsider our trading relationships within the country. There's lots of talk right now about interprovincial trade barriers, and I think there's an openness that hasn't been here in the past, where premiers are saying, "Oh my gosh, who are we going to trade with now?" Well, why not trade with the province beside me, or the one halfway across the country? So I think we have an opportunity to start building a more connected Canadian economy, removing those barriers, and that will make a lot of things possible that haven't been as easy. Beyond that, looking around the world to our natural trading partners that are natural trading partners because they share values of democracy, health and safety standards, environmental standards, because going forward, the race to the lowest common denominator in those areas is not going to be something that is going to gain us markets. That will lose us markets if we decide, hey, we're going to get rid of all our, for instance, our carbon taxes altogether. No, there are other countries that are going to require that people are doing something about climate change. So we can be in that group, and we can form active trading partnerships with those folks too.
There will, in fact, be lots of opportunity to discuss climate change. I understand we may have a question or two. Now, Grant, I want to hear your thoughts on this.
Sure, yeah, and I mean, at least for the first part of Quinton's comments there, you won't hear a whole lot of disagreement. In terms of Trump and tariffs, we have to respond and say absolutely 100% Canada is not for sale. And this country must respond from a position of strength. So our Conservative platform has committed to responding dollar for dollar with tariffs, but be specific about those tariffs and ensure that they're targeting industries that are important to Mr. Trump and his administration, to make sure that he is hearing from his support base how difficult this situation will get. Now, unfortunately, that will, in turn, cost some goods to go up in Canada. We must use the revenue generated from tariffs to protect jobs and industry here in Canada in the short term, while we renegotiate the USMCA agreement, which we know comes up for renewal next year anyway. Donald Trump negotiated this agreement himself in his first term. It comes up for renegotiation anyway. All of this tariff talk has been in preemptive of that renegotiation. We have to be negotiating that agreement from a position of strength. And as agreed with Quinton, we have to dramatically reduce interprovincial trade barriers. For too long, it's been the easiest thing to do to trade north-south. We now know that we don't have a reliable partner in the White House, and we may not going forward, depending on who follows him in the White House, but he's here for another 3.5 years. So we have to grow our economy from east to west. That includes, in our Conservative plan, a national energy corridor to get our goods to market. It also includes expanding the Port of Churchill. I was very proud that our leader committed to investing in the Port of Churchill, something that both NDP and PC provincial governments have done with both the rail line and the port, to ensure that there is more goods and that port is accessible more of the year, this is good not just for Canada, but it's particularly good for Manitoba, because all of those exports that are coming through the Port of Churchill generate revenue for Manitobans. This is an important aspect for our province. We need to get it done, and our Conservative Party is committed to adding 2 new icebreakers to the National Shipbuilding Strategy so that we can keep that port accessible more often. That is the key to finding new markets. Quinton mentioned finding new markets. If the carbon tax was going to find us new markets, it would have done so over the last 10 years. But we need to find a way to get our goods to the markets that want them. And that is Europe for a large part. They can't be buying LNG and other products from Russia anymore, as they have been doing for the last number of years, for good reason. They shouldn't be supporting Putin's regime. And so we need to find a way to get our natural resource products to them. Manitoba alone has 29 out of the 31 critical minerals listed as important to the global economy. We need to make sure that we're getting those out of the ground and getting them shipped through the Port of Churchill and into markets internationally by growing good jobs in both the primary and secondary industries here in Manitoba and across Canada. That is how we boost our GDP. We have the slowest growing GDP in the G7. That is not a position of strength.
Okay,
we need...
so just hold on here.
Yep.
I'm not going to let you filibuster, because I'm concerned about a couple of things I heard tonight. First off, Quinn, with respect, you talked about what the government should be doing, and I recall when we went through something similar to this, but it was in the agricultural sector, and it was mad cow disease. And you remember that our borders were shut down. And during the time that our borders were shut down to the United States to send cattle south for processing, in fact, we didn't do anything. We didn't increase our domestic kill capacity by 1 single cow here in the province of Manitoba under an NDP government. So I'm going to throw that out there. But the second point that always jumps out at me is we talk about developing new trades. The reality is that business will most likely do what it did during Mad Cow, which is we'll wait. We'll wait for the United States to open up, for the tariffs to sort of fall by the wayside. Am I wrong? Tell me that I'm wrong.
You might be wrong. You might be right.
I told him.
Okay. There's a difference in what's happening.
Okay.
The mad cow disease was an infection, right? It was not human caused, and therefore waiting it out. Well, it wasn't really waiting it out. It was taking action to see what could be done to be limit the spread, and then eradicate. So what are the reasons business wouldn't have been making changes at that point? Because there were active efforts in place to end that crisis. There were real things that could really be done to end that crisis. The crisis we're in right now is different than that. Who would dare to try to enter the brain of Donald Trump and see what could be changed there, or how you would go about that, right? That's not accessible to anyone yet, right? In Canada or in the United States. He's got everybody, even in his own administration, constantly on their toes. So trying to anticipate that there was a way that we could predict that would end it, that's the problem this time.
You spoke about renegotiating the USMCA next year. I think it's safe to assume that Donald Trump isn't going to negotiate a deal that's less beneficial to the United States. He's going to want more concessions from Canada. So what would a Conservative government give up? Would it give up supply management? What would we give Donald Trump in order to make these tariffs go away?
Well, I think you're speaking in hypotheticals a little bit, Deborah, and I'm not going to make commitments on behalf of a potential future Conservative government.
Your platform looks 4 years into the future.
It does.
It's full of hypotheticals, including this one. You talked about it. What would you give up?
True. Well, I'm not committed. I'm not going to make commitments on what I will give up and what I won't until we know who's in government and what Donald Trump's negotiating platform is when we get to the negotiating table with them. Those are discussions that are going to have to take place. But what I do think that needs to take place between now and then is a rapid growth in Canada's GDP, a rapid expansion of good jobs, here in Canada across all provinces. We need to be stronger economically than we've been over the last 10 years. And to do that, we need to make sure that we're finding new markets for our products. So while Kerry said I was filibustering, I would argue the only thing that's been filibustered by the last 30 years is expansion of the use of Port of Churchill, and we need to get that done. That's why it's in our platform.
That's why it's in our platform too.
Right, so.
There you go.
There we go.
We agree.
And
Let's get it done.
Good idea.
And so,
Let's get
you
it
know,
done.
and
Both
so-
gentlemen weighed in, but Devon, I know
And
you
so a
want to
couple of
follow
quick
up.
ones for Quentin. When you ran for the NDP in 2023, wasn't expansion of the Churchill port also in your platform then?
It probably was.
In the context of hydrogen power, I believe. The second question, however, is this. Grant mentioned energy corridors for transmitting electricity and other natural resources from coast to coast. We have Eastern Canada relying on American oil, for instance. What's your position on the east-west power grid and, frankly, on expanding pipelines further east from Montreal?
Yes. Well, they're two very different questions in my mind. Because in terms of the climate crisis, we know that more things have to be electrified. So an east-west power grid makes a lot of sense to help buffer regional shortages or outages that may happen now and then. So definitely the east-west electrical grid, and that's part of our plan, the infrastructure plan, which is aiming at job creation, because we do need vibrant job creation in Canada for sure. The oil pipelines, oil and gas pipelines are quite another thing, because yes, 3.5 years from now, it may very well be that Donald Trump is not in the White House anymore. And then the flow of oil and gas may resume the patterns that it had in the past. So we could start up, we could gear up, we could start building all those pipelines east to west, and there wouldn't be one drop or 1 cubic meter of gas go through any of them before the whole trade of oil and gas resources would change. And we've already know that we got like $50 billion in the Trans Mountain pipeline. Imagine going all the way from Alberta all the way to Ontario or Quebec, even more money. And it's a dubious outcome. If we're really going to be serious about climate change, those would all become stranded assets.
Next question, Chris?
Thanks. Well, I want to first thank both of you for attending this local debate, which is a bit of a dying thing in some regions of the country, so I'm glad you're both here. Another part of local politics, of course, is the local nomination process. And, to be frank, neither of you has won a nomination contest to become your party's candidate here in Brandon-Souris. In the case of the Conservatives, I know there were indeed several folks who wanted to be the Conservative Party candidate, but instead of holding a contest, the party appointed you as candidate, Grant. So I guess my question for each of you is, what makes you the best candidate for your party and the best candidate overall for Brandon-Souris?
Who would you like to go first?
Let's go with Grant.
Sure. Happy to have that, answer that question first, Chris. Absolutely. I'm no stranger to contested nominations. I ran in one provincially. Before this, for those of you who don't know, I was the MLA for Spruce Woods under the Progressive Conservative Party banner. And I ran in a contested nomination against 2 other individuals. I would have been glad to run in a contested nomination this time again as well. As many of you will likely know, our Member of Parliament, Larry Maguire, announced that he had a sudden health diagnosis. So he felt he could no longer run in this election, and the Conservative Party, because it was within the election period already, has it in their constitution, which was adopted by party members from across the country, that the national campaign team has the ability to appoint a candidate. And so they asked me if I would consider resigning my provincial seat and being their candidate in this election. I was humbled by their faith in me, and I have certainly been overwhelmed and humbled by the support from the Conservative Party membership here in Brandon-Souris and individuals and constituents from across the constituency at the doors. I think it's important to have a younger voice in Ottawa. I think I've got the necessary experience, having worked both provincially and federally to get things done. We know there's a lot of challenges. We've barely scratched the surface in terms of the challenges that are facing this country. I think it's important to have somebody both with a younger perspective and some energy, but also somebody who knows how to get things done, both in Winnipeg and in Ottawa, to build bridges between the provincial and federal governments and this region. And I believe that I have the skills needed to make a real impact and deliver results for the Westman and Brandon residents. And so that's why I believe I'm the best candidate on the ballot, and I'm very proud to represent the Conservative Party in this election.
I gave you some 2 minutes to do that. That's an advertisement. Gwen, give us your advertisement question.
Okay, well, I think I'm feeling a bit squeamish about that because it seems to be lacking in humility for me to say I'm the best person in the party to run because there are many, many talented people in our party. And so all I would say is that I'm the person who was able to, at this time, step forward that has the confidence of my party in this area, and just leave it at that. And I'm grateful for that confidence that I have from members of my party. What makes me the best candidate on the ballot? I'll be less humble about that. As I was implying with my introductory remarks, I have a lot of experience. And I know that youth, the vibrancy of youth brings its own kind of gifts, and I will not discount those in any way. But there are things that one learns with the passage of years, and especially in a time of crisis, as you mentioned, the BSE crisis, right? I lived through that. I was running a goat herd through that, right? And you see that there is some pattern to how crises come and go, and you see what the responses are over time. And I think that imparts a little bit less panic, maybe a little bit more stability in the measures and the view that a person might bring to them. So the experience is a big part of it. And I also just think that we need something different in Brandon-Souris. We all know that things haven't been great over the last 10, 20, 30 years. And part of that, I think, is sort of the conservative idea that cutting taxes will solve everything, especially cutting taxes for the rich. And I think we need to change that, because we look around Brandon, for instance, see there's a lot of folks who are not rich who are really not doing well. And so I think that makes me a good choice.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Okay, Chris?
Yeah, Grant, I'm not trying to pile on here, but I'm glad you brought up the Spruce Woods MLA experience here, because there are some folks in Spruce Woods I've heard that are concerned that you're only 19 months in and moving on to Brandon-Souris. And so I would just like to give you the opportunity to kind of explain your decision to step away from serving them and the impact that has to those constituents and the taxpayer with the by-election.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I mean, obviously, when serious health concerns come up from any elected official or anyone in our lives and in our communities, none of the timing of those things is ideal. And in fact, Larry is a mentor and a good person who has worked very hard to serve Brandon-Souris over many years. And so the timing isn't ideal. I was just as surprised as most that the federal party decided to call me. I do not, to disabuse people of any rumors, I do not know Pierre Poilievre. I've met him twice, but I'm humbled that he and his team have reviewed my work in the Manitoba Legislative Assembly, and that they feel that I was up to the task of being their candidate in this constituency. So, I had a very difficult decision to make. And those are tough conversations that I've had with Spruce Woods constituents at the doors, that I had with my provincial colleagues in the Manitoba legislature, and my family. But I had to make a decision that I felt was the right thing to do to help people in this region. Young people who are starting a family, trying to buy their first home, seniors on a fixed income. All of these folks and many others besides are in trouble and have suffered over the last 10 years We need to make a change at the federal level, and I am confident that I have some skills that can really move the needle forward. So that's why I accepted, and I have no doubt that there will be a strong, progressive, conservative MLA who replaces me in Spruce Woods.
Thank you. Can I follow up for a quick second? Gwen, you mentioned it. I had it written down here for later in the debate, but I want to throw a quick hitter at you. You mentioned it. You don't think taxes are high enough. So how high should the top marginal tax rate be? And at what income level should it apply? Rather than just saying tax the rich, that's an easy one. Tell us how much we should be taxed at. It's this we stuff, and when it should apply. It's a tough question.
Okay, so recently, not sure that I brought these figures with me. I'll see if I did. Nope. I'll have to. I should carry everything I own everywhere I go. Actually, that'd be a good idea. There are a few different answers to that. One is there's a big tax leakage in terms of money that's allowed to go offshore to tax havens, right? The estimate is like $39 billion worth of tax revenue is lost from Canada in that way alone, right? So if we could repatriate all that tax money, that in and of itself may be enough. That's the size of a fairly good sized deficit in the Canadian budget most years.
Okay, so second part of it then.
Another part is that part of our platform now is to introduce a wealth tax. And that would kick in incrementally above $10 million, 1% above $10 million, 2% above 20 million. Don't hold me to this, 3% above. Yeah, it goes up after 10 million, right? So, there's some people to say, well, I made this wealth. Why isn't it okay for me to keep it all? And I think I would just, two-word answer to that, Elon Musk. Oh, did I say Elon Trump? Oh, I didn't mean that. Maybe I did. So, in other words, we've been getting year after year after year this gap between the most wealthy and those whose income is lowest. Like
I dare say we're in the George T. Richardson Center, and that Brandon University is very often a beneficiary of the largesse of people who have done very well and worked very hard to contribute to causes like this.
Which is great.
But you seem to suggest that anyone who does that is therefore in the Elon Musk category, and I'm struggling a little bit.
Okay, not everybody is in the Elon Musk category, but I say the risk is there. That the more discrepancy there is in the wealth, the more discrepancy there is in power, and that leads to even more severe imbalances in our society, right? So the thing is, making money is not bad. Having money is not bad, but creating a society in which that wealth is allowed to grow unchecked, which is why there's anti-monopoly laws, right, to prevent that accumulation of wealth from continuing ad infinitum, right? Because what happens then is that we have, for instance, I think that's the root of the housing crisis that we have in Canada, right? When people have accumulated so much wealth that they don't know what to do with the investment money, then it goes, well, hey, real estate's a good investment, houses are a good investment, apartment blocks are a good investment, go out and buy these all up, kick out all the folks who are paying lower rents, tickle it up a little bit and bring them all back in at higher rents. So
with
real estate.
With respect, you're making landlords and people who create affordable housing to sound like rather rapacious vulgarians. So I'm going to cut you off. I'm going to ask
I wasn't
Grant
finished yet, but
to answer the same thing, and then we're going to take a break for a minute or two. Let's do it. Grant, we'll give you a minute to answer that, a quick one.
On tax for the rich.
What do you think is the highest marginal rate, and at what point should they kick it in?
Well, our conservative platform is committed to a 15% income tax cut across the board. We know that right now working families need some support. The last stat I heard at the provincial level was something like approaching 50% of Manitoba families are struggling between their grocery bill or their hydro bill in any given month. That's a totally unacceptable figure right now, and it's largely due to both housing and grocery costs. So we've got to get the costs of groceries down. We've got to make sure that our competition laws are strengthened. We've got to kill the carbon tax forever, for good, to ensure that shipping goods comes down. And we also need to support local innovation and investment in local industries like Vermilion Growers, for example, which was supported by the previous provincial government, which is growing tomatoes in Dauphin, Manitoba. We need more food production like that locally closer to home, and we do that by incentivizing people to invest in Canadian businesses, like our TFSA top-up. You can add an additional $5,000 to your TFSA if it's invested in Canadian companies under our conservative plan. We need to be, one of the biggest problems I hear from startups and small businesses is a lack of access to capital. We need to ensure that they have that to grow.
Thank you very much for that. Now, I just got a note here. A couple of really great questions are coming in from the audience. Devin, I'm going to let you ask one more question, then we're going to go to a couple of minute break. Kelly, my apologies.
Okay, my question is for you, Grant. Pierre Poilievre, your leader, has promised to use the notwithstanding clause to override the Supreme Court of Canada, several rulings of the Supreme Court of Canada, and to go around the Constitution. This is eerily similar to what we see happening down in the South. How can we trust a conservative government to respect the Constitution and the independence of the judiciary?
Well, far be it from me to argue with the prof that taught me Canadian constitutional law at Brandon University, but I believe Section 35 is a part of the Constitution. You can correct me on that. And the only one example, 33, sorry, thank you, Section 33, there she is, that's my prof. Section 33 is part of the Constitution, and the only issue, you said multiple issues, the only issue that's in our platform that we would have committed to use Section 33 on is consecutive sentences for mass murderers. This is a situation that we're seeing after a 2022 ruling from the Supreme Court of Canada, whereby mass murderers in Canada are no longer required to serve consecutive life sentences. So, for example, Mr. Bissonnette, you will remember, murdered 3 RCMP officers and injured others in a mass shooting in Atlantic Canada. He was originally convicted of consecutive life sentences, which meant he served 25 for one murder, then 25 for another murder, then 25 for another. The Supreme Court struck that down and said they have to be served concurrently, which means that he will be eligible for parole after 25 years, which means he'll be eligible to get back on the streets shortly before his 50th birthday. We do not believe that it is acceptable for individuals who commit mass murder. There's another example of an individual who shot up a number of individuals, killed a number of people in a mosque in Quebec. We do not believe that these people should be eligible for parole ever again after they murder multiple people in a mass epidemic event like that. So that is what our leader has committed to using Section 33 for only, and that is the only thing that we will commit to using that for. That's all that's outlined in the platform. I respect the judiciary, but I know that Canadians do not think that this is an acceptable standard for us to have set these people who commit these heinous crimes belong behind bars for life.
So, talking about parole, review of parole system, I think that's always good to be open for debate. But in terms of overriding the Supreme Court of Canada, that's a place that I would be reluctant to go.
Thank you very much. That's very concise and to the point. Let's take a break. 2 minutes?
Do I have a
You want to follow up? My apologies again, Kelly. I'm sorry.
Grant, do you know how many mass murderers have been released in Canada without serving an entire life sentence? Do you know the number offhand? It's a little bit of a trick question.
Yeah, I'm sure because the Supreme Court ruling came down in 2022 that so far the answer is none, but that this creates the potential for that to happen. Now, if that was a trick question and you caught me, yeah.
Yeah, so there have been 0 cases, right. And you forgot to mention the fact that there is a dangerous offender classification, and so that does allow for Supreme Court and other courts to be able to use that flexibility to label someone a dangerous offender and therefore keep them in prison indefinitely. So this is really not an issue in Canada. So I'm just asking why your party is making an issue of something that is truly not a problem, but is in fact incentivizing perhaps the use of Section 33, which can be really a slippery slope. Once we start using the notwithstanding clause, where are we going to stop in terms of undermining really important fundamental rights and freedoms in the country?
Well, I understand certain individuals feel that is a slippery slope, and I recognize that issue. But I would say the term flexibility that you use there is our concern. We, as Conservatives, we do not believe that there should be flexibility in the case of these types of cases. So that's why it's in our platform, and we've made that commitment, and we've made it only with specific reference to consecutive sentences for mass murderers, and that is our commitment to the Canadian public.
Sorry, one last question. So the flexibility is exercised by judges. So again, my point is that you would want to have politicians overrule an independent judiciary in this country. Your party is okay with that? Yes or no?
That is what our party has committed to in this platform. Yes, it is.
Thank you very much. Let's take 2 minutes. Please, I'm going to ask, can they speak? Let's take 2 minutes. We're now back to the federal election debate. We're on to our next question.
And my question is for Quentin. What is one policy, this is actually from a reader in the audience tonight. What is one policy or stance or item you disagree with your party on and you would advocate for instead?
That's
a hard question, isn't it?
Tough one.
We'll come back to you.
All right?
Yeah,
So-
you'll have
so
to,
Grant,
you'll have to give me a while.
The follow-up, Grant, the follow-up's for you. How about you go first?
Sure. Yeah, it is a tough question for sure. I think we've got a great platform. One thing that I can think of off the top of my head in terms of our platform is the agriculture sector. I know we've got the Farmland Protection Act proposal in our platform, but specifically when it comes to our canola and the situation right now with exports in canola, I think we need to be a little more aggressive, perhaps, in terms of what our policy is in dealing with the devastating tariffs that the government of China has imposed on the imports of Canadian canola. So if I had a request, I guess, if I can word it that way, it would be that we have a serious policy discussion and some proposals about how we're going to address that to protect Western Canadian canola growers. This is, I'm hearing it across the constituency that these tariffs will be devastating to our canola industry. It's a hugely important part of our GDP and a product for this region as well as the rest of Western Canada. So that would be my response to that question, Devon.
So I've written about this, and canola farmers in Western Canada are clearly being treated differently than workers elsewhere in the country who are victims of tariffs. What do you think the government should be doing? What do you think a Conservative government should do?
Well, I think number one, we need to find new markets for our canola. First of all, this isn't the first time that China's done this. And so I think, once bitten, twice shy. We should have been finding new markets for our canola the last time this happened. That didn't happen under the Liberal government. So unfortunately, we're in this position again. We need to find new markets for our canola. We also need to move secondary industry here to process our canola instead of just shipping the raw product out, which would create good jobs here in Westman in terms of a crushing facility. And then thirdly, we need a reset with the Chinese government. And I'm not sure that the Liberals, fourth term of the Liberals has the ability to do that. So I think we need a new government with a strong mandate from the Canadian people to reset our relationship with China. They're a huge population. Let's be realistic. We're never going to completely stop trade with China. They're a huge market for our products, but we do need to have a strong negotiating relationship and a reset on that relationship with the Chinese government.
Okay, Quentin, have you had an opportunity to review?
Yeah, I'm coming up blank. So I think that it is probably, this is the only reason that I would dare to run for any party, right? That when I look at the whole platform, I see the unified thread of this is, these policies are all aimed at creating a society that gives us all a chance, right? And tries to create a platform for all to concede, and right from one end to the other. And so for me, that it's all there in all those policies.
So,
one
go ahead,
of
sorry.
the options is you could have said, I don't disagree with anything in this platform.
Yeah,
You
I
could
don't.
say that.
Yeah. Like I said, it's my
Is that what you're
long-winded
saying?
version of that. Yeah, I don't disagree with anything.
Yeah, I
Well
was-
said, Devon.
Don't worry, we have defense policies coming up soon, so.
at risk of being somewhat snarky, you can't find a hole in the platform, but less than 10% of Canadians are supporting your leader and your party. What are they seeing that you're not seeing?
I don't think that this election is like other elections.
Okay.
Given what's happening south of the border, I think that there are a lot of Canadians who are really anxious about our political system taking a turn that's anything close to that. And, I hesitate because I value variety in the different policies and views of different parties, but we know that Mr. Poilievre has parroted Donald Trump's language so often and the tone that there are a lot of people who are really worried about that. And consequently, I think there are NDP faithful, and I find this going door to door even during the campaign saying, I would vote for you, I always vote for you, but I'm worried about if I do anything that would get Mr. Poilievre in power. And I think that's the best answer I can
Devon,
give
does
to that, yeah.
Okay, Chris, over to you.
Sure, let's switch gears a little bit to NATO defense spending. So in 2014, NATO set the target to be a 2% of gross domestic product spend and a little known additional 20% target of that money spent on new major equipment. So that's your tanks, fighters, submarines, etc. So Canada has been embarrassingly behind, and I think we're now at approximately just below 1.4% spend of GDP, of which only about 18.5% has gone on major equipment. So all parties have committed to reach this goal. Frankly, how are you going to get there? So how will you be spending money to reach that? And where's this money coming from? Is it going to be from deficit spending? Is it going to be from tax cuts, war bonds? How are we going to get there? Let's start with Quentin.
That was included in our costed platform that was just released a few days ago. So you'll find the plan of how we're funding everything there. As to the particulars of what we would be spending it on, I don't have those details in front of me. I know that the F-35 fighters were going to be canceled because they're reluctant to be buying into American fighter technology at this point, giving the difficulty of having them as reliable allies. I would assume moving on from that to find another bidder and entering into a contract for more fighter jets as part of that.
Well, I mean, certainly replacing those fighters is critical for the Air Force. They've actually been pushed past their extended life upgrades to the point where we had to shop out and get Australian used fighters, so we're really pushing that out there. So your party has identified that they want to scrap the F-35 acquisition. In fact, I think they originally posted that they would build F-35s in Canada, then hastily changed that to finding another bidder. So even if we were to find another supplier for this, how would you manage the capability gap between, okay, we're canceling the F-35s, CF-18s have been pushed beyond the limit, are no longer serviceable, and even if we got a deal from Dassault or Saab into the late 2030s, how do we manage the gap of having no fighters for NORAD, no fighters for NATO?
Good question. Yeah, and I don't have that answer at my fingertips.
Grant?
Thank you, and thanks, Chris. This is very important to you. I know personally. Thank you for your service to this country, and I know it's very important. As an MLA, I was very honored to represent the great folks at CFB Shiloh. They do incredible work on behalf of our country. In terms of NATO commitments, yes, our Conservative platform has committed to meeting the 2% NATO GDP spend by 2030. And we want to make sure that gets done. In addition to specific infrastructure projects you asked about, we are committed to upgrading Churchill to a naval base. That is in our platform. It is Canada's only Arctic deep sea port. Russia, for context, has, I think, 9. So we need to radically increase our presence in northern Canada. We have also committed to building CFB Iqaluit, the first Army base in the north, as part of our costed platform. In addition, we've committed to building 2 additional polar-class icebreakers. So right now there are 2 on order as part of the National Shipbuilding Strategy, which is a multi-decade shipbuilding program for the Canadian Navy. We've committed to adding 2 more that would be stationed at Churchill to make sure that we have access to northern waterways. So those are a couple of examples of specific major infrastructure spends to help us reach that 2% NATO target spend by 2030.
Just hold on a second. I see that, Chris, you really want to follow up here.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, so I guess a great presentation of the platform, but I'm glad you brought up the Canadian Armed Forces, and because we are, of course, an Army riding, so to speak. Is the Canadian Armed Forces too woke?
Too woke.
Yeah.
Not that I'm aware of.
I mean, like to Devin's point, so there's certainly your leader and members of the Conservative Party have decried wokeness eroding the warrior culture and effectiveness of the Canadian Armed Forces. So I'm curious your opinion of that.
No, that's not my opinion. In my experience working with the base commander and many others at CFB Shiloh. So that's my position on that.
Want to go on to the next question? Let's do it. Kelly?
Sure, thank you. So this question is for both candidates. Over the course of this election, both the Conservatives and the Bloc Québécois have promised to defund equity, diversity, and inclusion in the public service. We've also heard a number of candidates condemn DEI practices in business, government, and academia. To both candidates, are DEI practices a positive or a negative in Canada? And if elected, would you vote to protect or terminate such programs? Quentin.
I'd be happy to go first. Protect? Definitely. We have a long history of in our society of blindness to the forms of discrimination that affect people's lives, people in marginalized communities. Personally, in my own journey through that, even though it's been going on a good long time now, I discover dark corners again and again, right? And it's very easy for us to be discriminating without realizing when we are. I think it's critically important to continue to hold up diversity, equity, and inclusion as a value and a practice to keep those of us who are part of dominant cultures of all kinds, to keep us raising our awareness and to be bringing in members of marginalized communities to help us grow in our awareness of the ways in which we have not really lived up to be an equitable society.
Yeah, thank you for the question. My answer isn't substantially different. I do believe that we need to ensure that voices of marginalized communities are heard, particularly in federal employee situations. We need to make sure that we're hiring based on skill, of course, as well, but that we need to have voices heard from marginalized communities. So that's something that I've supported both in my work as an MLA and previously. And that is something that I would continue to look for moving forward.
So just to clarify then, Grant, you disagree with the position of your party and your leader on the issue of actually defunding DEI programs in the public service?
Well, I want to make sure that we're hiring based on skill as well as ensuring that marginalized voices are heard and represented in our civil service. So in terms of funding programs for DEI hires, I don't really know what those programs, the spend is for, to be quite honest with you, in terms of a hiring process, but that's my position on it, is that we should be hiring to ensure voices are heard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just to be clear, that in Canada, how DEI practices work is that it remains a merit-based system. So it's not like we have quotas that we have to fill with unqualified people. It always is, do you have the skills and the experience in order to perform the job? It is only when you've got equal candidates that DEI considerations come into the mix. So to say that your party wants to defund that is really based on faulty logic. It remains very much a merit-based system. So just maybe if you could maybe explain a little bit more, what are the specific concerns around DEI then that your party and your leader has?
Well, I won't speak for the leader, but I am sure that the commitment is to ensuring that we're hiring based on skill. That's my commitment to you and to the crowd here today and to all the to the constituents of Brandon-Souris. And so I want to make sure that we're having voices heard from all communities at the hiring level in the federal civil service, and that we make sure that we're hiring based both on that and skill. So if that's the system as it's functioning now, that's my commitment.
Do you understand and appreciate, though, as many of us have seen what has taken place in the United States, that merit has very quickly become a code word for white male?
I appreciate that that's certainly a fear of what's happening and could be what's happening in the United States. It's not my interest, commitment, or intention to bring United States, what's happening under the Trump administration here to Canada in any way, shape, or form.
Quentin?
Yeah, because I mean, this kind of harkens back to the use of the terminology wokeness. And I believe Mr. Poilievre has talked about getting rid of dangerous woke ideas in our universities, right? And so until somebody gives me a real clear definition of what woke really is and why it is so dangerous to society, I'm really nervous about that. And I know people, especially 2S LGBTQ plus folks that I know personally, are very nervous about anybody saying that this woke thing is something to be discarded, to be discouraged, to be eliminated, because they're hearing that they should be eliminated. This is dangerous language for the leader of a national party to say in Canada.
Kelly, do you want to follow up, or are we on to the next question?
No, I think, although I'd like to hear Grant's maybe answer to Quentin's comment.
Sure,
Quentin,
okay,
were you
sure.
looking for an answer to that, or did you just want to make a statement about that?
Well, I'm happy to answer either way. Let me make it very clear. As an MLA, I voted in favor of Bill 208, the True Spirit and Transgender Day of Visibility and Awareness. If I'm elected as a member of Parliament, I want to make sure that I'm conducting myself in exactly the same way that I did as an MLA, which is the fact that everyone can approach me and talk about any issue. I have no interest in dictating or having government dictate what people's pronouns are, what their gender is. They need to identify themselves as they feel comfortable. That is exactly how I will move forward. It's how I've conducted myself my entire life, and I will not change now, whether I am elected on Monday or not. So I want to make that very clear. As for woke, I think what the leader, certainly what I'm concerned about, is we're seeing increased incidences of anti-Semitic events and other items like that at university campuses across the country. Thankfully, we haven't seen anything like that here at Brandon University, and I sincerely respect and appreciate that. But as for that is my commitment. My voting record shows that as a member of the Legislative Assembly, and I will conduct myself that way with respect to the 2S LGBTQ+ community every day from today moving forward, whether or not I'm elected the Member of Parliament for Brandon-Souris on Monday. That is my commitment.
Devon?
Okay. Last year, it was widely reported that Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre would not allow Conservative MPs to support applications for communities within their respective ridings for funding under the Housing Accelerator Fund. And it appears that that was also the case for Larry Maguire here in Brandon. My question is for both candidates. If elected, what would be your higher priority? Representing the interests of the people who elected you or the party you belong to? Would you have supported Brandon's application for Housing Accelerator funding, even if your party leader told you not to? Quentin first.
It's hard to imagine our leaders saying that that we shouldn't, because it was an initiative I know that was welcomed at the City Council for moving forward on housing within Brandon, and so that is where I would have a good argument probably with my leader about that when housing.
So you supported it?
Huh?
So you personally supported the application? You were in favor of it?
For the Housing
Brandon.
Accelerator
In Brandon.
funding in Brandon, yeah.
Okay. Grant?
Yeah, thanks. I supported a number of applications as a opposition MLA to the provincial government for funding under various programs from various communities across my provincial constituency. I don't see myself doing my federal job any other way.
Okay, so let's just follow that up. So if you were told, if let's say a Liberal government is elected on Monday and the Liberal government proceeds with the Housing Accelerator Fund like it says it wants to, and your leader told you to do nothing to help Brandon get funding under that program, would you follow the orders or would you help Brandon get that money?
Well, as Quinn said, and I'm sure the situation would be similar, I think that would be a serious point of contention, serious discussion with the leader. But my job is to represent the constituents and the people of the Weed City and Westman. We need housing in this city, not just in this city, but in the rural areas too, but by that standard. And affordable housing is seriously short in our rural areas as well as the city. So my commitment is that I would be advocating on behalf of the needs of the constituents of this constituency.
To be fair, I just want to make this point. If, in fact, Mark Carney wins on Monday, based upon recent history, there's a decent chance that the current leader of the Conservative Party may not, in fact, be the leader on the following day.
But
He could defy him as he sees fit.
at that
My
point,
apologies. Back to you,
just a
Trevor.
quick question for Grant, just to follow that up. In fact, I'm not sure the crowd understands this or appreciates this. Grant is one of the few Conservative candidates in the country who is appearing at a debate. And in fact, if I understand it correct, Grant, you're appearing despite having been discouraged to not be here. And I think the crowd should know that.
Well, that's putting me in a difficult position, Devon.
I do that.
Anyway, I don't know how you know that. But anyway, I'm glad to be here tonight. I'm certainly not afraid of public accountability and tough questions. So I'm happy to be here, happy to have discussions with people after this is over, and happy to do that every day going forward. Thank you.
Chris?
Switching gears a little bit, this is off script here. One of the things that the former Prime Minister did that really raised interest in me is launching a off-the-cuff, hey, is the RCMP fit for task? So let me ask you, who might be the MP for Brandon-Souris, an area in our rural area where rural crime is a concern, and we look to the RCMP for that provincial policing role. Is the RCMP up for the task, and how can we support policing security in rural areas? And I'll start with Quentin.
Well, not up for the task might mean a lot of things. If up for the task means that the members of the RCMP sort of aren't capable of doing a good job, I would contest that because I believe that although there are problems in the RCMP from time to time, that by and large members do their best to do their job as best they can with the tools afforded them. There's obviously room for improvements. Internally, there have been some issues, as we know, and certainly in those areas, there's need for continued improvement, and also there are a lot of RCMP across a large patch of territory, and so in terms of actually providing public safety, it's really a stretch throughout our region, a lot of miles from a station to where their farthest call might be, and so we have to look at that in terms of public safety to see, are they adequately staffed?
Yeah, and certainly the staffing is a big concern. But I can follow up, Quentin, on RCMP, the municipal policing role. Mm-hmm. What should the role of the federal government be in supporting cash-strapped municipalities to meet the rising labor cost of RCMP officers?
I think all levels of government should be really looking at doing whatever they can to make sure that we have policing that's sufficient to provide public safety that we all want and that we all need.
Just received an interesting note, if I could weigh in, that apparently the spending on our military under Prime Minister Harper was in fact lower than it currently is under former Prime Minister Trudeau. So I thought that was kind of interesting, something to throw in tonight. I've heard the word liberal twice between you guys. I'm a little surprised by that. In any event,
well, it wouldn't be much of an argument, right?
Yeah.
it's like there's no one here to defend them.
Yeah. So back to your policing question. Yeah, I think the RCMP do great work in our communities. Let me be very clear about that. I think they do an excellent job. I think they are one of the best police forces in the world for what they do. They are absolutely strapped right now in terms of the demand because of the fentanyl and drug-fueled crisis, but also because of a lack of recruits. And also depot was closed during the pandemic for a number of years. If you go without a couple of years of graduating classes coming out of a program, you're going to be short for a while because retirements are still happening, and in fact they were happening faster during COVID than they were ever before. So we need to do everything we can as a federal government to support the RCMP, to help them recruit more people, perhaps to expand the class sizes at depot and ensure we're getting more officers through that program, very high quality program there in Regina, and make sure that they are then servicing our communities. But I think the federal government has a big role to play in that. But just to be very clear, I think they are doing the best they can right now, as short as they are. And these people should deserve our respect and thanks for putting their lives on the line for this country.
Could I just, do we have a fact checker in the crowd? I'd like would it be true that when Pierre Poilievre was in the Conservative cabinet that they actually cut $600 million from the RCMP's budget? And 1,100 border officers from border security.
Absolutely. Getting confirmation?
From the Devon decision desk, we have a, yes, they did that, yeah. Let's follow up, very, very, very briefly, on this issue. Part of what I was getting at is in 2025, we're in a multipolar world, we're facing foreign interference, we're facing these pressures. Does it still make sense in 2025 to have a national police force that does municipal policing on one end and does counterintelligence, executive protection, et cetera, et cetera? So is this, and that's my not asking the question very well,
Not
but
up to
does this
that
still
job.
make sense?
Oh, okay.
I understand.
All right.
Sorry,
Yeah.
you first, Whitney, you were first.
Oh. Go ahead if you want. Okay.
One of you go.
All right. It creates, no doubt, a lot of stress within the service to try to be covering that, to that span of duties, right? So it'd be a conversation worth revisiting within the RCMP, talking with them about how they feel equipped. Do they feel that they're sufficiently supported? And as a society, can we see ways of allocating resources that are more effective if they're targeted just to community policing? And then beyond another stream in terms of national security.
Yeah, I don't actually have too much to add to that. I think there is a conversation to be had around that because you're right, they are pulled in a number of different directions, and most other countries have different services that provide these different functions. But we do have to have the conversations not just with the RCMP themselves, but also with provincial governments. If we're moving towards a provincial police model, that's expensive. And you only need to look at Ontario's budget lines to see just how expensive it is to have a provincial police service in addition to the RCMP operating within their borders. So these are conversations that the federal government can't have alone. I know we need to have them likely moving forward. And in addition, municipalities, who, as you quite rightly note, also contribute to the RCMP when they have detachments in their community for community policing. Those municipalities have been stuck with a significant bill to catch up now that the RCMP has unionized. And again, just to be clear, I am very much supportive of the RCMP unionization to make sure that their wages are the same and on par with city police forces across the country. They deserve to have the same level of compensation as other police services, but these municipalities weren't part of that negotiation and are stuck with the bill. So this is a conversation that needs to be had between all three levels of government moving forward.
Okay, I've got a quick question, totally different, and I think this is a good one. I want to thank the person from sending this in, and it reads as follows. Given that Canadians are living longer than ever before, and that we face labor challenges, and you both mentioned that, why shouldn't we increase the retirement age to 67 as former Prime Minister Harper proposed? Well, I'd like either to answer.
Oh, sure. Well, I think seniors have contributed enough, and when you get to age 65, you have worked your entire life and contributed to this economy and this country in a big way, and so that's why our Conservative Party is committed to ensuring that those age requirements stay exactly as they are. People are certainly living longer. We've provided examples in our platform that if seniors choose to continue working after 65, we will make more of their income tax-free so that they're not being taxed by the government to ensure they keep more of that hard-earned money. But if you choose to retire at 65, we are not going to change those eligibility
With respect,
ages.
if some of that income is tax-free, then those tax dollars are going to have to be picked up from someplace else. So are we really talking about increasing taxes on the younger Canadians who are struggling to be able to purchase homes in this challenging time, in order to subsidize a class that has the largest amount of wealth of any class in the country? Is that what I'm hearing? That we should have poor people subsidize wealthier people?
What you're hearing, Carrie, is that our Conservative Party believes in respecting seniors and the commitment that they've made to Canada over their lifetimes and their working careers, and it's going to stay that way if a Conservative government is elected on Monday.
Quentin?
Yeah, what you'd hear from me is that all seniors are not created equal, right? Not all people are created equal in terms of their physical abilities. When I was in private practice counseling, I would have people come to see me, around age 58, 59, 60, some of whom...
Let's not get personal here on behalf of 59-year-olds.
Yeah, well, I'm not pointing any fingers here. But some people, and my own mother was like this, that around that age, after working like gangbusters all her life, and these people all their lives, they got to a point where it was just like they hit a wall, and all of a sudden, all the things that they did on a regular basis, somehow they did not have the energy to, and they were suffering physically, and they were suffering mental health issues as a result. So to change the age from 65 to 67 for some people would be no big deal. But there are a lot of people who are already running out of gas even before getting to 65. And to say, well, you got to push on. We're going to try to avoid one problem, and we're going to get in others. I think would be ending up with more seniors who would be on disability pension rather than old age security. Yeah.
Kelly?
Yeah, I have a question. A lot of families across this country, but including here in Brandon-Souris, are really struggling with issues of affordability, struggling to pay their bills, struggling to afford food. Without just giving us talking points, can you maybe tell us what you're prepared to do in a very specific, tangible way to really bring some relief for families that are really struggling financially? And that question is for both, so whoever wants to answer first.
Sure. I can certainly go first. Of course, everybody will know that we are removing the carbon tax, and not just the executive council style order that Mr. Carney did, but actually repealing the legislation that exists through Parliament, through laws. That's how we end programs in this country. In addition to that, we know we need to bring down grocery costs for families. And that includes ensuring that consumer protection legislation is in place to deal with some of the price gouging that we see going on from big corporate chains. And this is probably something that Quentin and I maybe even agree on. I don't know. There are a few people who are making a lot of money at the expense of hardworking families, and that's a problem. And so we need to get the cost of buying food down. We also need to fuel businesses, as I mentioned earlier, with reinvestment to make sure we're growing more food locally. Vermilion Growers is a great example at Dauphin, but there should be more of them. We need to be growing more food here locally, and there needs to be government incentives and government programs like the TFSA, Canadian Investment Top-Up, to make sure we're reinvesting in the Canadian economy to give people the capital they need to grow these businesses. So another example is the grocer, which operates little greenhouses in sea cans. There's one at Pearson. They supply all the fresh vegetables to Valley View co-ops across Western Manitoba. We need to be building more of those types of facilities, and we have programs that we believe will be the right tax incentives coupled with the reinvestment to make sure that they have the support that they need to make those happen. On housing, did you mention housing too? Affordability, or was it just groceries?
Well, groceries, but certainly families are struggling with housing too.
Housing.
Yep.
So we need to rapidly increase the amount of housing that's growing. I know this will be a discussion point and is a discussion point in Brandon. Development fees are going up. These are not costs that are being eaten by developers. Developers are passing these costs on to the people who are either renting their units or buying their homes. We need to get development fees down. That is why our Conservative platform is committed to compensating municipalities for 50% of every development dollar that they reduce in going forward.
Sorry to cut you off. Quentin,
Yep.
I want to hear what you have to say on this one.
Sure. Okay. There some similarities, but some real differences. Definitely, we would put a cap on essential grocery items right off the bat. There are lots of things in grocery stores that, you know, they could charge what the market will bear because they're not essential food items. But those things that everybody needs to survive, we need to slow that down and make sure that people have a chance to catch up on that. And with record profits in grocery chains, then there's no reason why we can't find a bit of slack in that department. Tax cuts we talked about before. The tax cuts we would give would be to those who need the most, which means increasing the basic personal exemption up to $19,000. So everybody at all income levels will have tax relief from that. Also,
with respect,
yeah.
Didn't the NDP government just do the opposite of what you're saying here in Manitoba with the basic personal exemption? Devon, this over to the Devon desk.
They refuse to have indexation to have, so we have bracket creep happening under budget 2025. Yes.
That's what, yeah. That's what.
Right. So we're doing something different, I guess. Federal party, right? Also it removed GST from some essential items like home heating and cell phone bills. We would maintain the dental care plan and the pharmacare plan, which other parties are saying that they would axe or they would not expand. So as we that the pharmacare plan, which has 2 drugs on it now, we would expand that because we know folks need more than just 2 medications, more than diabetes medication and birth control. There are lots of life-changing and life-altering medications that could be on that plan that would save people a lot of money.
Sorry for a second. Deborah, I'm going to go back to you.
I just had a question for Grant, just to follow up something I thought I heard. You mentioned development charges and your platform talking about covering a portion of them. What would you do with development charges?
Yeah, so for every municipal government that reduces development fees, we will reimburse them 50% of the cost of reducing those fees. For every dollar that they reduce, we will reimburse them for 50%.
Okay, so development charges represent the costs that municipalities incur with respect to development. It could be millions of dollars for some subdivisions. So, and in fact, Mr. Polyev has said municipalities will be forced to reduce their development charges or lose infrastructure funding or transit funding or gas tax funding. So there's a bit of a pressure there. So if the Polyev government would only cover half of the cost, who would cover the other half?
Well, we hope the city is earning and generating more revenue by taxing the buildings once they're built. That would be the concept there, and we need them to be building more homes faster, which is why we want them to get permitting times down to 6 months as well, which is the real influence that our leader has committed to, is that they need to get permitting times down.
I'm sorry,
But the issue is taxpayers of Brandon would in fact be shouldering the cost of new subdivisions. You live on 300 block of Dennis Street, and you're picking up the cost of infrastructure for Kerry's neighborhood.
Well,
I actually felt better when you made the 59 comment.
But does that sound fair?
I'll leave that between the two of you, but I think the vast majority of residents understand that cities need to grow in order to grow our population and support them. And this isn't just in terms of development fees for new subdivisions as well, which are costly to build. It's also about multi-unit residential facilities and infill housing. So we need to grow up as well as out. This policy applies across the board, not just for new subdivisions. I didn't mean to look at Kerry, wherever he may or may not live.
Okay.
Again, the concern I have about this, though, is that we keep talking this idea that somehow this is just impacting, these incredibly expensive homes. But we're also talking about a great need in our country for affordable housing. And I'm not hearing anyone talk about that. We want to cut taxes for seniors. We want to allow them to work and receive some tax breaks from it, even though it's the wealthiest class. And yet we're, again, not talking about what we should be doing for young people, when affordable housing is just a thing of the past. Kelly,
I
to
could
your
say
point.
something about that.
I'm sorry?
I could say something about that.
I'd like you to say
do,
something.
We do have a housing plan, right? And just sort of shout out to a member of the audience here. One thing that we have to do is we have co-op housing that is already in place in Brandon and is under threat of disappearing because of difficulty in getting funding for building maintenance and upgrade. And so we need to be sure that, to start with, that we provide funding to maintain affordable housing that we've got. Beyond that, the NDP would be releasing federal lands only to people who will pledge to build affordable housing on it, and seeking partnerships with co-op and nonprofit building organizations in order to build specifically affordable housing, not market housing.
All right. So next, I think it might be our last question.
Yeah, it's at 8:43, so we've got time for maybe
Okay.
one more question.
Winnipeg is currently in the process of establishing a safe injection site in the Point Douglas area of the city, where drug users can take drugs without fear of being arrested and hopefully avoid overdoses. Should Brandon have a safe injection site? If so, why and where? Grant, you want to go first?
Thank you, Devon. I do not believe that Brandon should have a safe injection site. That was my position as a provincial MLA when we were considering the discussion around the Point Douglas site, and it is the position of our Conservative Party of Canada. We've tried them elsewhere in Canada, and you've seen that they have not been successful. And so our party's platform is committed to ensuring that we are supporting facilities that will get people off of their addiction and connect them with the services that they need to rebuild their lives. As I was proud to support at the provincial level and with both the Bruce Oak Recovery Centre and the Ann Oak Recovery Centre. These are important facilities that get results. We need to be funding from the federal level facilities like that, and we do not need to be funding safe injection sites.
Quentin?
Yeah, I would say in order to get off their addiction, people have to be alive. That's a starting point for me. And certainly, I mean, if there are problems with safe consumption sites, then these problems can be investigated and techniques refined. I know that I witnessed what happens at an unsafe consumption site, which was right out in the street in front of my house in Linden Lanes, where I had to be on the phone with 911, be coached how to do CPR on a young man whose eyes were rolling back in his head and he was disappearing, right? So this changes one's perspective on safe consumption sites if you've been at an unsafe consumption site.
Go ahead. We have
Addiction
time
is
for one
mental health. Yeah, I'll
one
just say,
final question
yeah,
after.
yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay, so quickly, addiction is a mental health issue. We need to treat it more like a health issue and less than a crime issue. We need to deal with the crime that results from that to keep us all safe. But we really need to be putting an emphasis on looking at addiction as a health issue.
We have one final question.
I just have a follow-up. I just
Okay.
want to correct the record, with all due respect, Grant. The science and the evidence is very clear, and in fact, every harm reduction expert in the country is on record on saying this, that as part of an overall harm reduction strategy, safe consumption sites, while not in and of themselves are a magic bullet, but as part of an overall strategy, do in fact work and do in fact save lives.
Okay, so let's go over for the final question of the night. And I believe you two are battling it out.
It's about climate change, right? No? Come on.
Well, no, I'm sorry. It's over the past several months, there have been several violent crimes in Brandon, including the death of a woman last month following an assault. We've had an elderly man attacked with a baseball bat. What, in your opinion, is the best way to make Brandon safe again?
It's a combination. We do need policing to be part of the solution, but I think even a well-known former police chief says we're not going to arrest our way out of this situation, right? Someone who sat on the stage with me not too long ago, and that's entirely true. A lot of people are living in desperate situations and are driven to crime as a way to survive, and also because of addiction, are not the best, they're the best selves, that has turned them to violence because of internal torment. And once again, we need a policing presence to keep us all as safe as we can, but we also really need to be moving forward on homelessness. It's a big problem. We know housing first initiatives are very helpful as a first step to getting people off the streets into care of one kind or another. And we need to really have sort of wraparound supports for people who are dealing with serious mental illness.
I want to go to
addiction.
Unfortunately, Quentin, I want to go to Grant on this.
I got to the end. That's all good.
Sure. Again, some of the items that we've discussed tonight, there isn't a whole lot of disagreement amongst our two platforms, and this is certainly one of them. We cannot, that is a famous Wayne Balkin saying, I think, you can't arrest your way out of a problem. We know that the individuals are struggling right now. It is harder than ever to find affordable housing. It is harder than ever to put food on the table. And when people are homeless and hungry, they result and get taken advantage of by organized criminals. So that's why our Conservative platform has committed to mandatory minimum sentences for fentanyl traffickers, the people who are profiting from getting folks addicted to drugs and destroying lives, families, and communities. Those are the folks that belong in jail, and the people who are addicted that in many cases are committing these crimes out of necessity are the ones that we are getting into addictions treatment with programs that work, that have proven results, as I mentioned, like the Bruce and Ann Oak Recovery Center, recovery centers, I should say, in Winnipeg. So we need to fund programs like that. Our Conservative platform commits to that. And we need to ensure that the people who are profiting off of taking advantage of the most vulnerable in our communities are the ones that are behind bars. We need police to make sure that this is happening, and our criminal justice system to move quicker to make sure that these cases get before a judge. But that is my response to that question is absolutely, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. These are difficult challenges that are multifaceted and serious, and it needs a multi-pronged approach to solve them and make our downtowns and our communities overall safe again.
Thank you very much. Now, this is the time of the evening where we go to closing remarks. You know, memory serves, you got the first word. Then Quentin, I'm going to give you the opportunity now. You get to decide. You want to go last, or would you prefer to go right now?
I'll go last.
Okay. Grant?
Sure. Thank you very much, and just want to thank everybody in the audience for attending. It's great to have such a great crowd here, and it's always a pleasure to be back on BU campus as a BU alumni myself. Again, I want to thank Carrie, Kelly, Devrin, and Chris, as well as the Brandon Sun, WCG, and Brandon University for hosting and sponsoring this debate. It is an important part of our local democratic process here. Very glad to be here and participate today. I think what I've heard traveling from Elkhorn to Darlingford and Pearson to Brandon and as many streets as I can in all of those communities is that this constituency is ready for change at the federal level in Ottawa. And we need to be doing everything we can to make that happen. And I'm so honored with all the support that I have received so far. There are a number of challenges that this country faces, and we need to work together to move this country forward. And so our Conservative Common Sense plan has a plan to build more homes, stop the crime, reduce costs, rebuild our military, and bring affordability home for seniors and hardworking families. And I am so proud to be the Conservative candidate in this election. I would be remiss if I didn't ask for your vote on Monday, April 28th. And thank you very much again for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. Quentin?
Yeah. Very much appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak with panelists and moderator and Mr. Jackson and all of you. It's a privilege to have been campaigning, knocking on doors, meeting so many people, as I found in the provincial election, that the more doors I knock on, the more I love my community. and the people that I find within it. So thank you for that privilege. I think it's time for a change in Brandon-Souris. I guess that may be no surprise, seeing as the NDP has never won in this riding before. A change would be good in that respect. But I think the change is, we maybe just touched on it, but didn't get too deep into it. There's a way in which it seems to me, when I look at the Conservative platform as it comes out in the news, there's a lot about tax cuts, as if tax cuts could cure all our ills. And while some of them are tax cuts for middle class and folks who are struggling that make a lot of sense, which is why they're in our platform too, when we start talking about tax cuts for raising the TFSA, the tax-free savings account limit, and we talk about rolling back any changes to capital gains taxes, then it's obvious right off the start that who benefits the most from that. That these are big tax savings for people who already have the most money. And that's not where we need changes in our tax system. That's not the kind of change we need. If we need those taxes from those who are doing well, and I hopefully a lot of people who are doing well would not begrudge that, because they see the lineups at the food bank. They see people living in tents on the banks by the railway tracks here in Brandon, and in places, believe me, in small towns where I've been knocking on doors too, there are people who are living rough and really need help. We need to change the idea that making the wealthy wealthier will fix the problems that we have. That hasn't worked for 40 years. It's not going to work for the next 4 years. And so that's the change we need. And as your voice in Parliament, we know that NDP do good things. We get Medicare, we get pensions, we get dental care, we get pharmacare, we get good things, the things you need that will make your life more affordable and a better life humanely. And for that reason, I would ask for your support.
Thank you very much. Gwen, I want to thank you for coming out tonight. Grant, I want to thank you for coming out tonight. These are not easy events to be part of. You're standing up here for a couple of hours. Really tough questions are coming from the panelists, and you have no idea in advance what's coming at you. I have some familiarity with it, and it's hard. And I have a tremendous amount of respect for the people who do this. So I want to thank you both, and I hope that the crowd will join with me in applause for you. But I'm further going to say that one of our viewers tonight asked me to give a shout out to South Tobacco Creek, because while you mentioned Darlingford, I guess the voters in South Tobacco Creek were feeling left out tonight. So that's an important one. You know, this concludes our Brandon-Souris debate. I want to thank the candidates. I want to thank our excellent panelists who did an outstanding job. I want to thank the audience, both here in attendance and at home. I want to thank them all because of their commitment to democracy, to the experiment that's our country. This, as we've seen what's going on right now in the United States, there's probably never been a more important time to be part of the public discourse. As I said, this is the most important and consequential election of our lifetime, at least in my opinion. And I think that from what we saw here tonight, regardless of the outcome on Monday, we would be well served by either of these two candidates representing Brandon-Souris. So thank you. Thank you to our panelists, and then another excellent job. And in the words of Barack Obama, don't be positive, don't boo, vote. And that's the evening. Thank you, folks.